Hello, everybody. Have you heard that a funny thing happened on the way to phonemic awareness? There is tons of research out there about the importance of phonemic awareness. And as teachers, you've probably been inundated with demands to do phonemic awareness a certain way, many times research-based, right? That's what we're going to be talking tonight about, the research base behind phonemic awareness, because it has a funny little history, and I want to share that with you tonight. Okay? So let me just give you a little clue what I was talking about a funny thing that happened on the way to phonemic awareness. I'm going to be checking my phone, make sure that we're in the right place, but you're in the right place if you want to learn more tricks and strategies about how to teach reading, because here at Reading Simplified, we streamline classroom reading instruction and we also accelerate students' reading achievement. All right? Are we working here live? We're going to be talking about the funny strategies that we sometimes are told to do because it's a research-based activity. All right? That's our topic for tonight. And how did I come across this idea? Have you seen this movie or this musical? It's from like the 60s. A funny thing happened on the way to the forum. And I'm just checking to see if we're all a go. Yep, it's good. And so in this movie, or this musical, they have one purpose, but along the way, a lot of other funny things happen that are unexpected, right? That's at least what my 14-year-old brain remembers. I got to see this comedy when I was about 14, and I got to watch the mostly seniors at my high school put on this show, and it was really impressive, absolutely hysterical. And I remember that little catchphrase ever since. Funny thing happened on the way to the forum. And I've been studying phonemic awareness for about 15 years, and this phrase just keeps popping up in my mind when I think about the history of phonemic awareness research and how it's gotten manifested into our classrooms, our curricula, and our standards. So I'm going to be talking about that tonight. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. By the way, I don't think I mentioned I'm Dr. Marnie Ginsberg here at Reading Simplified. And I often give you a specific strategy to try or an activity. But tonight I want to kind of give you a perspective on this big mammoth topic of phonemic awareness and show you a little bit about the roots so that when you see some standards that you're expected to implement or you see activities to implement, you'll have a basis for knowing whether this is really the best of our research or just it has been done by research, or is it the best? So that's kind of a question. Is it gotten some good outcomes, or is it really gotten great outcomes? So the funny thing that happened on the way to phonemic awareness research and to our outcomes is that when it first got started, maybe about 40 or 50 years ago, we didn't even have the term phonemic awareness, and they didn't know, but they suspected, these researchers who were studying it, they didn't know if phonemic awareness caused reading achievement. So they were looking for a causal mechanism. And when researchers, social scientists, or scientists of any type try to get a causal mechanism, it's pretty tricky because when you see two things that coexist, that often come together, that doesn't prove that it's causal, that one thing caused the other. For instance, if you have a class of kids right now and you measured their big toes, you probably would find that the kids with the bigger toes were the better readers. But why is that? Is because they both go together, right? Big toes and better readers. Did the big toe cause the being better reader? No, it's probably because the big toes are the kids who are what? They're the older ones, right? So they have had more experience with language and literacy, and so they're more likely in general to be ahead. So we, as researchers, we want to dissect if something is just connected or it's causal, that one thing caused the other. So when people started investigating kind of broadly the concept of phonological awareness, which is the broad category of how we process sounds oral sounds and how that might relate to reading. They couldn't just say, oh, the kids who are good at phonological awareness are better readers, and the kids that are bad at phonological awareness are the poor readers. They couldn't just do that and say it kind of comes together and say, oh, it's causal. So what did they do to try to show that it was causal? Well, what they did was they separated phonological awareness from reading. In other words, they did phonological awareness orally only. So they might play with kids and with puppets. A lot of times it was like preschool kids. And this is research that started in the 70s mostly and the 80s, but there was a lot of it also in the 90s. So these researchers would have kids who are preschoolers or kindergartners, and they would do games that were auditory only. In other words, no print, nothing visual other than maybe a cute little puppet. And the puppet would say, I'm saying the word cowboy, but I want to say it in two parts. Can you help me? And the kids would have to say cowboy. And that would be phonological awareness. They would be separating a word into its two chunks, or the two, and here the two parts of the word, in this case also two syllables. So that's one level of phonological awareness. So researchers were doing these activities, again, orally only, not because they said this is the best way to teach reading. They were saying, is actually phonological awareness causal? Does it cause reading? And you can't do auditory processes like the phonological awareness and the reading together and then say it's causal, because you don't know which part was the phonological and which part was the reading. So they tried to separate it out. Let me give you an analogy. So say somebody's interested in showing that standing up is good for your health. Well, I'm just going to get really kind of absurd with it, but maybe they do an experiment where they have people who sit for a certain amount of time each day, and people that instead of sitting for that same amount of time, they have to stand. But then they say, well, if you stand but you wiggle, it's going to be different than just standing. So they do really strict guidelines because they need to show that it's just standing, because that's the theory, and they're trying to show the causal mechanism. So they make sure, okay, the guidelines are for this study is that you have to stand. You can't move, and you can't jiggle, and you can't jump. So just standing. Okay, what might happen? This goes back to the funny thing that happened on the way to the forum, okay? So if they did a study like that, and they did sitters and standers, and sure enough, the standers had better health outcomes. Maybe they lived longer, or had less disease, or felt stronger, et cetera, et cetera. Then, what if they then said, look, standing is research-based. And what did they do in this study? Well, they made them stand stock still for 45 minutes with no wiggling. Okay, so what if then they started telling people, this is how you get healthy? And they told the PE teachers, the research base says that we should stand still for 45 minutes and we will be healthier. And so the PE teachers, because that's the research base, they start taking away the fun games, and they say, well, the research says that we need to stand stock still, because that was what was done by those researchers. But those researchers weren't trying to prove that that's the best use of our time, best use of our energy, and the best way to get health. They were just trying to prove one little micro question: does standing cause better health outcomes than sitting? And to some extent, I'm hyperbolizing this a little bit, but it's almost as ridiculous as that musical A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. The researchers were headed this way, but people took the research and said, oh, this one way where they were trying to just prove causality and not necessarily prove optimum outcomes. So they took that research, which was good, very helpful research, and they said, oh, let's do a whole set of curriculum based on that research. So what did that mean? They just did auditory only activities because that was what the research base said to do. You see where I'm going with this? Have you guys seen reading instruction or any kind of literacy or language-based instruction where they really are pushing you to do a lot of phonemic or phonological awareness in isolation? So, right? Isolation. If you have seen that, maybe it's not something you see now in your curriculum, but have you seen that in your career as a teacher or as a parent who's homeschooling, have you seen oral only? If you have, type in the comments isolate or isolated, because that's kind of what happened. The researchers were trying to prove that phonological awareness caused good reading achievement. And when people saw that it did make a difference, they said, oh, that study is showing us what we should do. But that wasn't the intent of the original research. So a lot of studies kept getting done to kind of get at, was it causal for everybody? Was it causal for some? Yes, Sarah, you've seen that isolated. It's very common. So a typical kindergarten teacher might be expected to spend like 15 minutes a day just playing games with puppets, playing around with sounds. Now, again, it will get reading achievement. It will make a difference, and it's not bad. I'm not trying to say it's bad, but was it designed to be the best use of our time? Is it closest to reading instruction? Well, not really. So let me show you some ideas about how this all came about in a little more depth, and then show you what we could do instead. So let me come up with this. Here we go. Hopefully this will work. Okay, so the researchers, when they were trying to again show causality, they said there's this continuum of phonemic awareness, and it starts over here on the left with just sounds around us. Like, can you hear that there's a noise over there and that the teacher's voice is speaking? Can you hear those sounds? Do you hear the birds? When you hear a note on the piano, is this note higher or lower than the other note? When I speak, do you hear that I'm speaking in a sentence or with words? And then that would be kind of the broadest level. And then they move down and get more careful with their instruction for kids and say, can you pick out words? So if I say, the cat ran, what were the words that I said? The cat ran. So that would be another level of phonological awareness. Again, notice it's all oral. And then the next level would be identifying syllables. Okay, so the puppet usually would be the one doing this in these instructional activities. Okay, so I'm going to say a word, but try to hear the different chunks that the puppet says. Okay, the puppet's going to say window. What are the different chunks of sounds that he says in window? Oh, window. Do you hear it? Window. Okay, so that's all that global phonological level that these researchers were testing. Does this make a difference? Does it move us to getting good phonological awareness, good phonemic awareness even more specifically? Does that get us good reading? They were testing it, and sure enough, it does. It makes a difference. And then another level they could do would be identifying rhymes. So I'm saying, I was saying, can you see? Oh, how do you say? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? That's cute. I don't know that I've seen that written. Thanks, Sarah. Only pull that up so everybody can see that. There we go. Perfect. So that's an example of just kind of orally perceiving something that you have no clue what it really means, and you certainly don't know what it looks like in print, right? And then you might the students, in these type of activities in this research, the students might do identifying rhymes. Okay, the puppet or the teacher, okay, the word is fat. Can you help me figure out a word that rhymes with fat? Oh, cat, sat, mat, etc. Oh, that's Ramona the Pest. Okay, I'll have to check that out. I don't remember that, but that's a great book. Thank you, Sarah. So all of those things were auditory only things that were proving that phonological awareness, even more specifically phonemic awareness, is causal to reading. So that was super helpful. And yet it was not as powerful of an impact as when they got to this, identifying phonemes. When the kids could say that cat has k, a, t, and when they could get to that level, that was actually what got strong effects, like effect sizes of 1 and up, which is one of the highest levels. The other activities might have been more likely to get effect sizes of 0.4, 0.5, 0.3, much lower. So this was just, again, this is one of those funny things of research. They were trying to prove one thing, that it was causal, but along the way people said, oh, this is research-based. Let's make a curriculum out of it and we'll get better outcomes. But they didn't quite study the research enough to show, well, what actually got the best outcomes? It's identifying phonemes or blending phonemes or anything at the phonemic level. And we have a lot of research on that now, that the difference between knowing that cat rhymes with fat and sat and knowing how to put the k, a, t together is significant. In fact, it's pretty interesting. There's a study of some adults in Portugal, I believe, who were functionally illiterate and maybe even completely illiterate, but they were poets and they were great at rhyming. So they could do the broader, more global phonological awareness, but they couldn't read because they hadn't accessed how individual phonemes relate to print. That's just one little kind of extreme example of how one global thing like phonological awareness doesn't really relate so much to reading, because when you get to reading, you really have to understand how individual sounds map on to print. Okay, so that was one kind of dynamic of the literature with phonological awareness. The other one that's kind of interesting is that early on, a lot of phonological awareness curriculums would just, again, do oral only. And then some of them would even do like concrete representations. Have you guys done activities where you use like tokens or like Elkonin boxes? So there's a box to show a concrete spot where a sound would go. So the kids would move, say for the tokens, let's move a k token and a token and a t token. So there's something visual or concrete, but it's still not with print, right? So those would, again, be another type of phonological awareness. Those do make a difference, but when you look at what actually makes the most difference to reading, it's the stuff that's here in green. Letter and sound instruction that does happen, if not immediately, and then teaching the kids how to put that phonemic awareness into play with real words. All right. So, are you seeing how this kind of history of reading instruction could be a little bit bizarre? Reading research has caused some kind of quirky things. So my message for you tonight is to understand that when you see the claim that something is research-based, it's true. Phonological awareness and both phonemic awareness, orally only, in isolation, does make a difference for reading outcomes. And we have research studies that have shown that. But that wasn't the intent of those research studies, to show that that's the best way. But when we actually look at studies that compare, or we look at studies and see which gets a really strong effect. Like this is doing phonological orally only, but this is doing it with letters. And this is doing it with at the rhyme unit, and this is doing it at the phonemic level. Which one is going to get us the most bang for our buck? All right. So really, it's going to be just like the one I suggested. If we move to the phonemic level, we want to also move to not doing phonological awareness and orally only, but with concrete representations of actual letter sounds. So you've seen isolated phonemic awareness. You've seen isolated phonological awareness. When you see that, if you can, insofar as you're able to choose different activities that that connect sound and symbol, you will be making so much more difference in your kids' outcomes. So I know that there's tons of studies and there's tons of guidelines that say, well, this is research-based. And again, it is true, but now you know a little bit more about the backstory, about the 40 or 30 years ago of what was going on. Researchers weren't trying to prove that doing it auditorily only is best. They were just trying to show that it was causal. And the only way to show it was causal was to separate everything else out that was reading related, because you would never know, was it the reading instruction or was it the phonological? So when they separated it out, that was helpful. And it does show that phonological awareness and phonemic awareness are both causal to improving reading achievement. And that's a very, very well documented outcome in reading research. However, their intent in doing those studies was not to show optimal instruction. And in fact, when we look at studies that and outcomes, it's much clearer that doing things closer to the phonemic level and closer to real connected print gets better outcomes. For instance, the National Reading Panel found that. They documented, let's see which one. First of all, they didn't even really mess with phonological, excuse me. little tricky problem there. Let's see if I can back out. Technology. I'm really getting so much for that. But the point was, with the one error that we saw earlier was pointing to phonemic awareness. The National Reading Panel, when they kind of collected a ton of research and said, and they boiled it down, they sort of did an averaging of lots of studies. That's one way of looking at it. They said it's really the phonemic awareness that predicts reading, not so much about syllabication and working at the rhyme unit. It's phonemic awareness, the individual sounds. That the word float is f, o, t. Okay. And then the other thing that they found was that doing it in connection with letter sounds gets you more bang for your buck. Okay, so this was here tonight to help you juggle these competing things that you hear. It's so challenging when you're encountering a curriculum that tells you to do X, and you think it's probably not as efficient as some of the activities you have done, but then someone says, well, this is research-based. Again, it's not that there's been deception, and it's not that it's not true. It's just, it's kind of a misappropriation of what actually happened. It's just a funny thing. Let's see if I can pull it up again in case you didn't see this before. Oh, my picture's all out of whack. There we go. You know, researchers are intending one thing, but people who didn't read it carefully and weren't in that field, they interpreted it a different way and led us in a different path. And there's been some real inefficiencies as a result. So when you get kids to tie their perception of sounds of words into print, then it makes a lot more difference, and it's fast. In fact, a lot of study, I did a study of other studies of classroom instruction in phonemic awareness, and it was only about 4 to 11 hours that made a big difference. One study got dramatic effects, again, an effect size of 1 or above in only just 3 weeks. And I see that too in my practice. So let's switch caught to cat. So I'm drawing attention to the phonemic properties of the word, but also doing it with a visual representation and the visual support of letter sounds. Okay, ah. So that's an example of phonemic awareness, individual sounds, connecting it with visual representations, these spaces and these letter sounds. All that linked together is so much more powerful than doing it orally only. Also very powerful would be to put sounds together. Okay, what word am I saying? How's my mic doing? I'm going to say a word for you guys. K, o, I, k. Did you hear that word? Could you blend those sounds together? I'll do it again in case it's not doing very well. K, o, I, k. Blend those sounds together and you read a word. So that's another example. Hopefully the student would be looking at the letter sounds, and then they would read the word and move right along. So again, this is not to teach you a particular activity, because it's just to give you a concept of how to cope with the conflicting advice that you receive, and also to encourage you, if you've been trying reading simplified strategies and your curriculum is suggesting that you do a lot of things that seems to be less effective, know where that's coming from. It's just that phonemic awareness is a fairly new, although not that new, concept, and it's a fairly new research based finding in terms of the centuries of social science, which probably isn't that many years long, but change doesn't happen fast in many fields, getting research to practice. And so I'm going to actually get really tactical, though, with these ideas and move them into 3 strategies that we teach that implement these things that I've been talking about, linking phonemic awareness with print. So if you haven't joined us before for our workshop, 3 activities a day to keep reading difficulties away, that I encourage you to join us tomorrow night. We have a workshop. It's a free workshop, and I'll be teaching the 3 most important activities that move the needle with so many kids. So please sign up for that. Even if you've seen it before, it may be a nice refresher. So that is in the comments if you want to sign up for that. It's tomorrow night, Wednesday night. And if you can't make it, go sign up anyway, because you will get the replay, and the replay will be available for 3 days. So this is interesting, Sarah. Depending on when you start instruction, the kids can't segment yet. So making sure that they can, for example, segment syllables is necessary for reading and spelling of multisyllabic words. Connecting segmentation with actual letters, definitely good. Exactly. Marilyn Adams' curriculum is one of the classic examples where she took the phonological awareness research and then made a curriculum out of it. And I think her work is unbelievable, and it has totally transformed our field for the better. But in that one area, I think that it's not the most effective, because you actually can go straight to this level with 3-year-olds. And in the context of building a word like cat, and maybe not showing them all these other things, but just having them do 3 sounds at once, they can segment very quickly. You don't actually have to go from syllable to rhyme to individual phoneme. That was part of this kind of misadventure of phonemic awareness. It's true that curriculas have followed that path, and people have assumed, therefore, that that is the natural developmental progression, because that's the way the curricula has gone. But there are studies that have taken 3, 4, and 5-year-olds and gone straight to the phonemic level, and they do fine. They do it quickly, and they start reading words. And that's what I find too in my practice and with working with other teachers. So it's pretty interesting. It's not to say, again, it's not that, let me pull this up if I can. Now it's all small. It's not that these were not research-based. These activities in black, they definitely are good. There's nothing wrong with them, and a lot of them are just for fun too, and kids can really enjoy playing rhyming games, whatnot. But if you really want to get the biggest bang for your buck with reading, you want to dive straight into this greenish color and identify phonemes, and kids are capable of a lot more than we think. That's my message here at Reading Simplified, is because we can save time by cutting to the chase, streamlining instruction. So I'm glad that you pointed that out, Sarah, because I absolutely know it's a very well-known, both of those curricula are very well-known. And then Benita Blockman was also part of the research where she kind of jumped more to she did more letter sound instruction in her interventions. Let's see, she was more like, in this area a little earlier on. So just something to consider. That's my perspective on this. And I did spend a lot of my time in grad school studying this in depth. It's not just that I'm basing this on my experience working with kids. So again, if you want to know how to put this into action and find some activities that are very powerful for your kids, join us for 3 activities a day to keep reading difficulties away, and that will be a free workshop held tomorrow. Thank you. Oh, you know what? My systematic review, Katie, that's so, maybe I will let you see that in the Reading Simplified Academy. It's old now, so it's 10 years old, but so I don't want it to be published widely, because I know that it needs to be updated, but I will show that for you. Thank you. Let's see what you said, Sarah. And then let's see here. You found, okay, you're saying it's interesting. You found that if you use letters instead of chips, you were able to get young children to segment phonemes. Exactly. It's the same thing, actually. It's giving them a visual representation, but it's also moving them a little closer to real reading, because they're seeing words around them, but they don't see chips. It's just tying it together more effectively. It's more meaningful. So when they are playing with letter sounds and writing their name, if they do that and then they're playing with chips, they don't see how that ties in. But if they do letter sound instruction and they're playing with sounds and it's all in the context of words, then things click for the child more readily. I wrote a post about this. I think if you go to readingsimplified.com/teaching-letter-sounds, I believe you will find that. how teaching phonemic awareness and letter sound instruction all simultaneously from the get-go is just more efficient, and it's kids pick stuff up a lot faster. So yeah, that good. You totally got my point there, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, so Katie's like, awesome. Great. All right, thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for being here.